All right, anybody who's been around for the past month is probably inundated in everything about Utopia Planitia. We've had ModCon. We know we've been covering it for the last 2 weeks here on Continuing Conversations. There's been some amazing interviews like on heavy.com. You can see some written interviews. So it's just amazing the crossover love that's happening between STO and STA right now. I'm Michael Dismuke with Continuing Missions, the blog, of course, which is the #1 fan site for Star Trek Adventures RPG. I'm also a freelance writer for Star Trek Adventures. Had my hand a little bit in the Utopia Planitia, but it ain't about me today, because today, if you've been following for the last 3 weeks, today's the day we talk all about ships, and we're going to take you places you've never gone before. And the reason why is because we have experts with us today. But Jim, first introduce yourself, and then let's go ahead and go around and introduce our other two guests today.
Yeah, sure thing, Michael. Thanks a lot. Jim Johnson. I am the project manager and line editor for the Star Trek Adventures role-playing game published by Modifius Entertainment. And we have two wonderful guests with us tonight, Aaron Pollyea and Thomas Maronne. I'm going to have them introduce themselves right now. So I'm going to go straight below me on the call here. Thomas, introduce yourself.
I'm Thomas Maronne. I'm the Associate Art Director for Star Trek Online, the free-to-play massively multiplayer, officially licensed Star Trek game set in the Star Trek universe where you can create your own Starfleet, well, not just Starfleet, but Star Trek crew. And I was lucky enough to get to contribute both art and words to the Utopia Planitia shipbook, including several Star Trek Online ships that became canon with the season 2 of Star Trek Picard. So it was really thrilling to bring that to Star Trek Adventures with this book.
Awesome. Thank you, Thomas. And Aaron, introduce yourself.
I'm Aaron Pollyea. I'm a freelance writer for Modifius. I'm the guy that does hold a lot of the starships, a lot of the science, a lot of the technology. I've done some of the missions, the standalone missions, things like that. You see my name in a lot of the books. So I've had my hand on a lot of different types of things in Star Trek Adventures.
Mm-hmm. And Aaron, I will apologize. I think I consistently introduce you as Aaron Pollyea. So my apologies. I've written myself a note that it's Pollyea.
Yeah. No,
So
that's okay.
I got a Post-it note. It's on my monitor now. I will never ever forget.
Well, the other one is his other one is his Mirror Universe counterpart, just so you know. So it's just that you're dipping in two universes.
That's the guy that's clean shaven.
Clean shaven, right? Yeah.
All right. This was a good segue, though, Aaron, to your introduction. And the reason why is I'm going to do something really cool and get into the minds of Aaron and Thomas right now. There's been a lot of talk. A lot of you who have seen interviews with both these gentlemen about Utopia Planitia. I wanted to do something different because Continuing Conversation is really getting to the heads of the fans and the writers together. Myself and Aaron were having a conversation, which I'll segue into this one, and it was about the psychology behind how you build a ship frame. And one of the first things I asked Aaron, I want Thomas, your take on it too, after Aaron responds about it, is how is a fan coming into Star Trek supposed to view the term class? Like, what makes a class of a ship? How is that determination made? Aaron, talk to us about, you gave me an analogy, and I'd like to hear what you said and get Thomas.
My first analogy wasn't my first analogy wasn't very good. Let's put it that way. I was trying to talk about like the difference between species and families of species, but okay. And I said, fine. Okay. Think about Corvettes. A Corvette has been built since like 1952, I think. And all Corvettes are a class. Corvette, cars we're talking about. But over the years, they've looked different. They have been refit. So a Corvette can be considered a class. Let's say it has 4 wheels. It has the same structure. It has the same general purpose. It's a sports car. It's there for guys to look good in. It might have an open top. It might not. But it's not really meant to be a family car. It's meant to evoke a certain feeling. So that would be like a class. And how it's looked different over the years is how it's been refit.
Okay, Thomas, your take on class.
So it's and how Star Trek Adventures approaches class might be a bit different than how I think about it. The model that we typically use in STO is where it's much more specific in terms of if a ship is built out as a certain type, like Aaron says, it's a family, but you can get to a point where there might be enough variation to branch off to a different type of a member of the family, and that goes from being a just another member of the class to being its own class. So typically in the Navy, in the U.S. Navy, and a lot of navies follow this convention, you have the first ship is has it's a little bit of a chicken and egg, where you have this program. The Navy, Department of the Navy is like, oh, we need a new destroyer, and these are the things it needs to do. And so they create a whole bunch of subcommittees, and those people go off and they, then they send out, RFPs to different defense contractors, and then there are bids, and Lockheed Martin says, well, we can build this destroyer for you for, $10 billion. And these are all the things that we're going to promise it's going to do, and we'll deliver it by X date. And then at some point in the process, that destroyer gets a name. And then, so one of the most recent ones is the Zumwalt class destroyer, the USS Zumwalt. And then if the Navy decides to order more Zumwalts, then all those other ships that are built after the first USS Zumwalt become Zumwalt class ships. So it's certainly a murky and long bureaucratic process where you're trying to create a system by which that you can organize all these bureaucracies to think about these giant, very intricate machines in a way that makes it possible for them to be built and evaluated and iterated upon. And the class is kind of a tool in sort of wrapping your brain around that. Now, you might have variation within a class, like Aaron says, where in the Navy you have blocks of certain classes. So you have block 1 is sort of, this is the very first model of like the Arleigh Burke class destroyer. And then there'll be some refits, and they'll add some missile tubes or take some missile tubes away. But structurally, that is still an Arleigh Burke. And they did this with the Iowa class battleships after World War II. I think the USS Missouri, they extremely refit it, but it was still at its heart, still that original Iowa class ship, just renovated and everything. Now, if they decided to build a new a new Iowa class, a new ship like the USS Missouri from the ground up, that had all the cruise missiles and electronic warfare suites and stuff that the Missouri had, at that point, they might actually call it a Missouri class battleship instead of an Iowa class, because it's not built to the original Iowa spec. It's built to the Missouri spec. So that's a very that lens of kind of naval military science is the lens that I like to look through all the stuff that we do with Star Trek Online and the Star Trek Online lore. So I know it's a bit in the weeds, but that's
it's not in the weeds. We're here for the weeds. That was
no.
Beautiful. Jim,
yeah, and I generally agree with everything Thomas has said, actually. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. That the bones of the ship are kind of the things that make it what it is, what class it is. It's kind of why when Enterprise got refit from its TOS version to the movie era version, it's still a Constitution class, even though it looks different, because her bones are still the same. Her general systems, while they've been updated, are still the same and in the same places overall. Yeah, it's a big refit, have no doubt, but still a Constitution, right?
Yeah, got it. And I know it's a little early, but Thomas, you said we went in the weeds a little bit. I want to actually go a little further into the weeds, and I know I'm really going to just geek out over this. And what I have trouble with, because there are and specifically speaking of Star Trek now, there are so many classes and subclasses and alternate names out there in both Twitter and just in the general fandom space, that because there's so many great people right now making renders, making their own ship designs, making their own ship classes. And like even reading some of your stuff, Aaron, where you're talking about like, oh, this is a block 2, block 3, whatever. And then there's the subclasses and subvariants of classes. And like, I've even been, watching the recent blog posts by Bill Krause and I don't remember the names off the top of my head. A couple of the production people that are in the show, Dave
Blass and Terry Metalis.
Yeah, so they're talking about some of the new ships that are going to be showing up in Picard 3 are like Constitution 2s or Constitution 3s, or I don't remember the specific details. I was just wondering if both of you could go into a little bit more detail on like, how do you differentiate a class from a subclass to a block 2, block 3 to all these different very, very granular subcategories? Because this is one of the challenges I had when we were putting Utopia Planitia together was like, well, is this a separate class or is it a subclass? Like, where does it belong? Does it need its own 2-page spread, or can it be like mentioned in a paragraph, or like what's the deal here? So enlighten me, and then by extension, enlighten the casual fan who may know starships but may not know the gradations.
Would you like? Oh, go ahead, Thomas.
Well, I mean, the sort of rule of thumb I have in my head about it is, could you take a Nebula class ship, for example, that the very first Nebula class ship in the line, and could you take that and turn it into, like, could you take the Phoenix that we saw in the Wounded in TNG and turn it into the Sutherland that you saw in Redemption, right? And you could. All you have to do is swap the pod, right? Those are the only big visual differences that we see, right? And so those are variants of an existing class, right? But then if you get to a point where you're looking at the structure of something, and like if you take the Constitution and the Excelsior, and you can't upgrade a Constitution class to an Excelsior class because the mass difference is so vast, and the shape. Like I think it helps to imagine the skeleton of a ship. I think when answering this question, just like people, ships have skeletons. They have frames, and you can kind of see this whenever the Enterprise gets destroyed, or like they cut a hole in it or whatever. There are like spokes and frames that block out the internal structure of the ship. This is just like real sailing ships. Real military vessels have frames that kind of demarcate each like different sections of the boat, like ribs. If you think of rib cage, right? So Federation starships have rib cages like that. Mm-hmm. And so if you have to do something where the rib cage no longer works and you have to pull out the whole rib cage, that's essentially starting over, right? Then it becomes, to me, a new class of ship. But otherwise, if it's like, well, you can like cut out these pieces. I was actually asking my friend Andy Presby, who's he's a retired U.S. Navy. He used to build submarines. He was commander, an XO on the submarine for a little bit, nuclear physicist, and now he designs rocket engines. But he was saying that there was actually a class of I think it was Virginia class subs where they made a variant where they kind of cut a hole in the middle of it and extended it out to add more missiles or something, and then welded it back together. But like the front and the back are still the same, right? But the actual ship is longer, and so that was like a block 3 or something. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of the kind of skeleton test or frame test is kind of what I use in my mind to determine, is this a variant or is this something totally new? And that's why I consider, incidentally, most of the things that we've done for Star Trek Online, I consider them new classes, because they were all original construction in the sense of almost none of them were refit from a pre-existing ship. They were designed and built, ex nihilo or from nothing. And then also like the actual internal structure and how the shape, the cross section of the ships is so different that you couldn't turn a Nebula into a Sutherland, for example. So that's been my reasoning. And I know we kind of had some back and forth on that.
Yeah. Yeah. And Aaron, before you offer your insights, just one clarifying question for me, Thomas. Mm-hmm. From all that perspective, it totally makes sense to me. Help my whole my knowledge when they took the Constitution class from the 2260s, early 2270s, and they completely refit it into the movie era kind of thing.
Mhm.
Like they were really tearing up the skeleton, as you were saying, right?
Mm.
I think they kept like the very, 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 very core.
Yeah, and if you ask my buddy Andy, he said that he would say that's why it's not actually a refit. Like in his Navy brain, it does not make sense as a refit. It's too different.
Yeah.
The size is different. The subtle shapes and stuff are different. But I mean, we just sort of, it's gotten steam, and that's how they present it in canon. So we could just go along with that. But
Got it. Okay.
but you could,
maybe they kept it for good luck in there.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's what they did.
Yeah, I mean, well, Scotty says in the dialogue, he's like, this is an almost totally new Enterprise, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not actually sure. I mean, that I wonder if maybe Starfleet did it because at that time they were just so desperate for hulls because all the other Constitution class ships had been destroyed.
Yeah.
And they're like, we can't afford to throw it out.
Right.
Or it could be, I mean, sailors are a suspicious lot, right? It could be like Michael says, where they just, she was the only one to make it back, according to I think the novelization of TMP, right? That the Enterprise was the only one to make it back, and so they were going to keep her alive as long as they could.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Mm-hmm. Thank you for that clarification. Aaron, anything to add to all that?
Yeah, I mostly like 99% agree with Thomas. Like there's a couple ways that I tend to look at it a little bit differently. Like blocks, when I mention blocks, those are refits. So like if you're building a Constitution class from scratch, right when it was first designed, that's the first block, right? That's unmodified stats. But after its first refit, you might build block 2 that has an improvement to its engines. And its stat is bumped up. Yeah, it's just a refit, but now you're building block 2 constitutions and then block 3 constitutions in what, the 2260s. So they might all resemble the TOS Enterprise at that point, those block 3s, because they're being built to the same standards as the refits of that era. Subclasses, I would say, are ones that are built 90% to the same standard, but might be built by other member worlds to a slightly different spec. So your Andorian constitutions might have a subclass because, well, they tend to like phasery things, and they might put on more phaser banks. It might be a little more tweaked towards weapons or speed, where the Tellarites might have more communications or computers for some reason. Those are the subclasses. It's generally the same ship, but slightly different systems. It has the same outline. The Constitution refit, to me, is the same class. This is where, like, Thomas and I might disagree a little. It is the same class because it's the same general outline. It's the same general size within like 5%. You can say like some sections were stretched a little bit, but like the original saucer generally fits in the refit saucer. The secondary hull's not right. Yeah, you have to do some tweaks with the secondary hull for sure. And then the nacelles are just nacelles. You can swap out nacelles all the time. So if there's a big shift in nacelles, that's not that big of a difference. That's a block or a refit.
This is, I have to say, I'm the average Star Trek geek. I never have claimed to be the in the weeds level that both of you are, or even Jim, any close to it. But me being able for the first time to really understand classes, I don't know if this has been done anywhere before, this conversation. So I'm digging it. I mean, this is, I love it.
Yeah, and it's okay. It's totally cool for us to all like have differing views on exactly what a class is. Because I think in universe, even then, like the writers, when they're writing a show, have a different view on what exactly is what. So, hey, great, go with it.
Right. Yeah, whatever. I mean, ultimately it's your game, right? When you're running a game, you can just decide, this is the Unikitty class, Super Dreadnought, and that's, have fun. God bless. One thing I did want to say though, about blocks and everything. So, what you might find too is that, you take whatever you call the Constitution refit, you can call it a block 3 or block 4 or whatever, but you can also then build new construction to that spec, and then that ship would be called a block 3 Constitution class, right?
Yep.
So it is all kind of vague because you have that sort of block descriptor, but then you might also have somebody say, well, this is a Enterprise B type Excelsior, right? So it's like they can use the block terminology, or they can give it the name of the first ship in the subclass. Like, all of this stuff is valid, and that's, I think, one of the great things about learning, diving into the way the Navy does stuff is it's so dang confusing, and there's so many different ways to say the same thing. But I love that because it makes the universe feel textured and real, and and it reminds you that these are, Starfleet is just like the Navy. Starfleet is a massive bureaucracy. I mean, it's bigger than the U.S. Navy, right? It's probably got like millions of people, literally millions of people working for it across, dozens of planets. So there's a lot of, so I think that's kind of a fun thing to think about when you're making your campaign and I think there's some of that in this book too, is like, this is what the day-to-day things you have to deal with as a Starfleet officer. There's not the sexy beaming down the planet stuff. It's like, I got to file these logistics reports, or else, the admiral's not going to renew my.
What I love about it too is, the book only has so many pages, and Jim always talks about how he has to edit out all this extra stuff. But hearing both of you speak to this depth about it, then I'm going back to look at these stat blocks and these space frames and be like, wow, so much thought. And now I'm understanding it a lot better, actually, not a little bit better, a lot better, which is one of the goals. I said, I wanted to take this interview in a different way than any of the other ones you've done about Utopia Planitia, so that the goal listening or watching this is, okay, now that you understand the fundamentals of Navy design, which we're talking about, Navy design, whether you want to play with a standard ship or you really want to construct your own ship, you could all of a sudden say, you know what? I have an entirely different class ship. I don't have a Corvette here. I have something never seen before. And that's where your imagination can take you, right? That's kind of exciting about what we're going to talk about today. Chapter 4 of Utopia Planitia, Federation Space Frames, is we have the formula to do everything Aaron and Thomas just talked about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to just add before we go on to the next bit. I think this is the book that really crystallized it for me. I think, Aaron, you had written this into some of the other books, into some of the other descriptions of other ships and other books that we've done. But I don't think it really crystallized until I worked on this book, partly because there were so many space frames. I had so many space frames to edit. I was constantly reading the same stories, not the same stories, but I was getting the same concepts hit at me page after page after page. And it really sunk in that like what Thomas was saying, the Navy has very particular ways of doing things, but Starfleet is like, it's a Navy on steroids, because it's not just Earth Starfleet. It's all Starfleet. It's everybody. And it really drove, like I've told this story a couple of times where in editing this book, I would catch myself stopping editing and just starting to imagine storylines and plot seeds and hooks and things like, oh, wait a minute. What if there's a fleet yard in orbit around Beta Z? How would they approach building this space frame differently than they would, somewhere else? And it's like, oh gosh, what if they did this and they did this, because they have a different design philosophy, and maybe they take the stock Intrepid class, and maybe they decide to add a few tweaks to it, and all of a sudden it's still an Intrepid, but now it's a Beta Z Intrepid instead of Mars Intrepid or something. And that just got the story idea spinning even further. And then I took it a step further, because we had been working on the Shackleton book, right? And I was like, oh, how could I take these philosophies that you're plugging into these different space frames and apply that to a completely alien species building their own spaceships? Like how would the Akaru approach building a super optimized, super efficient ship compared to the Packlids, who would just clump ships and throw stuff together back and forth? And what's their design philosophy different? So I just love the fact that you both put so much detail into your write-ups, and that there's just so many ways you could spin this toolkit that we have and to make just like all kinds of crazy stuff. So I'm going to ask a question
about, I want to ask a question about that toolkit, and I want the STA answer and I want the STO answer. So on page 58 of the Utopia Planitia book, Aaron, you wrote the system points chart. And so this is kind of a way to frame, at this time period, you can have so many points to put toward design of a ship.
Okay.
I'm going to come back to that in a second, Aaron, but I have to ask Thomas, when you're designing STO ships, are there also limits? Are there How do you do that?
So there are, I'm the associate art director. So I primarily work with the visuals of the ships, like what they look like. But then we have another discipline called game system design. And those guys are the ones who actually create the stats of the ship and how they operate in the game. They do have it's not quite the same as like you have so many points to allocate between these systems, but it sort of is in the sense of all of our new ships are what we call tier 6 ships, or ships that can operate at the end game or whatever. They have a fixed power level, and so that means they have a certain amount of what we call bridge officer seats, and they have a certain amount of what we call console slots and weapons slots. And so a lot of the designing the ship is sort of moving those numbers around, just like what Aaron does, in terms of, well, if we want this to be an engineering focused ship, then most of its bridge officer abilities are going to be engineering inspired. Most of its console slots are going to have to do with engineering. But if it's like an engineering hybrid tactical ship, then you'll have like mostly engineering, but then like its second most powerful lean will be in tactical, and that gives you STO has sort of the same. It's a classic Star Trek split of tactical and command for us is tactical science and engineering, right? And so ships can lean in those three directions, and then there are lots of different types of ships that are very hybrid. So like a destroyer is a hybrid. It's mostly an escort, but it has a little bit of engineering, so it's a little tankier than like a normal escort that's like purely focused on tactical, for example.
Got it. The reason I asked that was because we talked about this before, is like Star Trek Adventures is not a level up game. You're not trying to build the ultimate starship that can blow away planets. And so I like to know that, you got the STO frame. Now you got STO kind of, you were saying the game designers build around that. And then we have STA. Aaron, talk to us a little bit again about that, why those limitations for Star Trek Adventures work for the narrative that is Star Trek.
Well, you don't want to have your ship be ultimately powerful regardless of the era, but you also want to have ships that are from different eras be able to be compared to each other. So earlier ships from earlier eras are going to be generally less capable. Their systems aren't going to be as advanced. So your NX class isn't going to have as high of stats as a Constitution or a Galaxy. But it's not just about the quality of the systems. It's about how many systems you can actually pack into the space frame. So the size of the scale of the ship also helps determine how many system points you're able to pack in. Now, if you look, departments aren't touched. That's about like the personnel that you put on board the ship, how trained they are, how specialized the crew is in certain departments. So ships that have a high command score generally have better command officers, better diplomats, generally more communication systems, not always, but because that's a system. But it goes with all the different departments. So in general, you want to have lower systems earlier on to compare to, and then higher systems later on. You also want to see a difference between pre-Federation starships and Federation starships. So before the Federation, we clearly know that the Vulcans had been tooling around forever and had far more advanced ships than United Earth. Same with the Romulans. In general, the Andorians and the Tellarites were supposedly kind of the same because the Vulcans, quote unquote, made the mistake of actually sharing technology with them. And they didn't want to repeat that mistake with humans. So they tried to be on the same par. That's why if you all make starships from like, let's say 2070, your human-made starship is generally going to be less capable than a Tellarite starship from the same era.
Okay. So before we get into that, so everyone, listening or watching, again, that's the reason you have a limited number of points, or all the reasons Aaron just said. But then I have to, I'll throw this question to Jim, because you're a big game master and storyteller. And this is how I think in my mind. I'm like, really, do I really believe the United Federation of Planets and the entire galaxy have the most advanced ships? No, there must be someone out there who could blow people away. So how do you handle that from a narrative sense when you like take Aaron's design of the Borg cubes in the Delta Quadrant package, right?
They're scary, aren't they?
Right. So narratively, what are some of the caveats if you're a game master? Like, no, I'm trying to show that there's maybe some more advanced species in the Federation out here. How do you still make it a playable game, ship to ship? Any ideas about that?
For me or Jim?
Anybody. I was going to give a chance to Jim because I know he's a game.
Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a tough question for me because I lean into the narrative more than anything else. Like I'm more interested in the narrative than I am in the statistics. And no slide against the statistics or anything, but it's just like I thought the stuff that you did for the Borg in the Delta Quadrant book was great because at least numerically it showed just how incredibly powerful those ships were, and it also narratively kind of like hopefully drilled home the idea that if you're a player character ship, you shouldn't be going toe to toe with the Borg. You should be getting the hell out of there or negotiating or something, because that's what we saw on screen for the most part. Is that you do not directly engage the Borg. You go around, because you send a fleet at them, you're going to lose, right? Mm-hmm. We saw 2 fleet engagements against Borg cubes, and they both got pretty well hammered. And First Contact's a little bit different than Wolf 359, obviously, but like Wolf 359, that was like when that first came out on TV, and we were seeing that live for the first time. It was like, oh my gosh. The Federation just got their asses kicked, or the butts kicked, excuse me. And like you saw the wreckage and the pieces of ships flying around. It's like, oh my gosh, we got our butts handed to us, really. And that really drove home the drama of like, oh, maybe there are fights you should run away from. This isn't like some games where you just go toe to toe and you duke it out until you're victorious or you're dead. Like, no, it's perfectly okay to run away or to beat a strategic retreat and come back and find a different approach, because that's really what Star Trek's all about, right? Is finding another approach to a problem. The Borg are just a big, gigantic problem, and you just got to find another way to do it. And that's how I would approach it, Michael. In answer to your question, if I present my players with a big, insurmountable ship or station or thing that just statistically is just off the charts, and they're like, oh. Because I got a couple players who are into the mechanics and are into the stats, and they'll be like, wait a minute, that thing has a 25 shields. None of our weapons can even hope to penetrate that. What are you doing? We can't possibly win. It's like, well, maybe from a toe to toe fight you can't win, but what's so yes, and
that's why I thought it was important to talk about that, because. Yeah. The goal is not to build the ultimate ship to take on the Borg within a year of playtime. It's to really still balance the game mechanics through the narrative. Go ahead. Aaron.
Yeah, I agree with Jim. I think in the when we were writing the core book, when the idea was always there to put the Borg in there. My honest first suggestion was not to put a stat block in for the Borg and just say that the Borg are going to win unless narratively you come up with a really good idea of how to defeat them. Yeah. That there really shouldn't be stats here. And then no, okay, Aaron, you need to make stats. All right, so let's make the Borg cube scary, but the Borg cube ends up not being the scariest Borg thing out there. And so Delta Quadrant came out and I had to make even more frightening things. But if you want to have like a more advanced ship like that your players are going against, let's say like that Borg scout ship that Hugh was on at one point, maybe it's a century more advanced than the Federation. Well, great, and you want stats for it, great. Put 10 more system points in there for an extra century. And it's a really good shorthand. It might not be as great of a thing narratively speaking, because I'm with Jim that narratively the narrative should actually drive it all. But if you're like, well, I do want to give it stats.
Dang it, that should have been an inset box. We didn't have that little inset box. That's great. Yeah.
All right. That's the interesting challenge, right? Because just thinking about it, Star Trek has tons of examples of huge, massive things that are like narratively really interesting, but statistically, I mean, there's no need for statistics. I'm thinking about like the Planet Killer, the Dyson Sphere, the Crystalline Entity,
the Whale Probe.
The Whale Probe, and even V'ger, right? I mean, you don't need stats for these things. Why would you use stats? Just it hits you, you die. Or you get scanned into V'ger's memory banks, and then you live on forever in a different format, right?
Your dice for damage on the V'ger scanning thing is just yes.
Yeah, and Thomas, I just have to ask again because I like making the STO comparisons because this is perfect marriage of those two games. This book, and I haven't not had time. I played STO when it first came out. I just didn't have time because I'm such a tabletop fanatic. But are there things in STO that are undefeatable and you're supposed to retreat from? I don't know.
I mean, STO is a very different animal in that sense because one of the major points of MMOs is progression, and you want to feel after you've put hundreds of hours in your character that you are the unstoppable, baddie, or the unstoppable force of nature in the universe, because you've leveled up all your gear, your max level character, you've got all the best abilities. So I mean, there are people who we have a group who plays Star Trek Online called the DPS League, Damage Per Second League, and they are competing with each other constantly. Like, oh, I did 400,000 damage in this run, or 600,000 damage, or whatever. And and a typical player who end game might do maybe like 8,000 or 10,000, right? So the game to them is just maxing out everything and trying to, and so the effect of that is when they're playing is like, oh, there's a Borg cube, not anymore, like literally in seconds they'll blow it up. But that's the fun to them.
That's
and that
cool.
The Star Trek Online, it's an MMO, but it actually is a very single player friendly game. So if you want to play through the story and experience the game you want to, you totally can, and you don't have to worry about other people ruining that, like ruining whatever sort of experience you want. But we
when the ship blows up, coins don't fly everywhere.
No,
okay.
No.
Want to make sure.
But we do have content that people are supposed to play together, and so you'll run into those people in the what we call TFOs, task force operations. That's a lot of the repeatable content and stuff. But in terms of story missions, we do have some instances where a ship might have plot armor for a minute, just because we need, we're telling a story and it's not time for that thing to be blown up yet. But because if we didn't do that, there would definitely be people in the game who could blow up immediately.
That's fascinating. I mean, I love that serving the both audiences. That's really cool. Wow, that was a great Act 1 for this interview so far. Going into Act 2, again, like I was saying, I was trying to figure out what would set this different so that people who've been keeping up on Utopia Planitia release would watch or listen to this and be like, whoa, glad I tuned in. There's something I asked Thomas to do earlier, and it was, hey, send me some graphics from a couple of the ships that are in STO, and let's talk about the process. If you were, for instance, picking up STA, you pick up Utopia Planitia, where do you start with the space frame selection and then building on top of it? And he came through with some wonderful art. I'll show the first picture and then let Thomas kind of talk about the picture, the origin of it. And then let's kind of go through the process. If you're picking up the UP book, Utopia Planitia, and you're in chapter 4, how we adapt that. So let's look at this picture here. Can everyone see the ship there? Thomas, talk to us about this beautiful baby. I'll scroll through the couple pics you sent.
Thanks. So this is the USS Jojo class. I think I ended up calling in the lore that I wrote for it the fast battle cruiser. I designed the ship for Star Trek Online as in the game, it is a cosmetic variant of the Walker class. So the Shenzhou from Star Trek Discovery, you could buy this ship and use these pieces instead of the Walker pieces if you wanted. The conceit was essentially take the Shenzhou layout and turn it into adapt it to the motion picture era style. So it's roughly the same size as a Walker. In my head, it's not meant to be it is not a Walker refit. It is not meant to take those pieces and update them the way the Constitution refit is. The lore for this class, or I don't know, would I be getting ahead of myself if I go through the?
No, please. This is exactly what because this is what we know, the lore, and then we're going to talk about how to reverse engineer it into STA.
Right. So one of the interesting things about this is originally when I started to do a TMP motion picture era, version of the Walker, I wanted to do a Constitution style saucer, but then I put the Walker class next to the Constitution refit and noticed the Walker is actually a lot bigger. The saucer in the Walker class is a lot bigger. And one of my pet peeves is when effects artists just sort of scale up the same component and call it a day, like where you have like these giant motion picture nacelles or whatever. Yeah, there's the Walker class. And so the saucer is way too big to be reinterpreted as a Constitution style saucer, but it's in the ballpark for an Excelsior type saucer. So that's so I decided to go with the Excelsior route. And from there, I had to explain, well, how come you see so many Excelsiors and Mirandas, but you've never seen this before? And so the lore they came up with to explain that was that this is a competing project with the Excelsior class for the kind of turn of the 24th century. This is the new direction of Starfleet starships, and we're going to do the Excelsior multi-role cruiser, or this is kind of the height of the Cold War with the Klingons. So there's another faction in Starfleet that wanted to do, no, we need to build a battle cruiser that's going to be able to take on Katinga class ships and win. And so this leans heavily much more into like the militaristic side of Starfleet. And so
I think one question too about the name of it, the Giorgio. Talk to us a little bit about.
So it's very unclear to me actually. So when I, is Giorgio dead? Like according to Starfleet, I don't know. I mean, at first she wasn't because they brought Mirror Giorgio in to the Discovery and said, oh no, she just went for retirement. She didn't actually die at the Binary Stars. But then they classified everything to do with Discovery when Discovery went into the future, and so she died again. I don't know. So ultimately I decided to name Giorgio as a casualty of the, Tecumseh's War, because this essentially is Starfleet saying, we're going to remember the people that fell in action in that devastating war, and we're not going to let that happen again. So we're going to beat the Klingons to their own game. We're going to make this really big, powerful battle cruiser. And that's how we're going to retain, the mineshaft gap, essentially, if you're a Strangelove fan. And so the reason that you don't see any of these ships anymore is obviously the Khitomer Accords happen. And just like the Washington Naval Treaty, they kind of imply that, is this going to be the end of Starfleet in Star Trek VI, right? Because of the Khitomer Accords and peace between Starfleet and the Klingons. I interpret that to mean there's some very heavy restrictions on what kind of ships and starbases Starfleet can build following the Khitomer Accords. And so either these Giorgio ships are, decommissioned, or they're converted into different type, exploration cruisers, but they're not really carried forward like the Excelsiors are, because the Excelsiors as multi-role cruisers are much more flexible and able to sort of weather any sort of political fluctuations. But that's something, as an aside, when you're designing your ship, it's really fun to think about not just, there are two things, right? Like, what does this ship do? Like, it's not just, I want to make a cool starship. It's like, when they're designing ships in the Navy, they have a problem, right? We need small ships that can operate in littoral waters to prevent suicide boats from attacking oil tankers, right? And so they have this mission profile they build out. So the same thing with Starfleet. And so they solve a problem. The Klingons have way better battle cruisers than we do. We don't have any battle cruisers. We got to make a battle cruiser so that we can stay out with the Klingons. And so there's that. But then there's the political consequences, because especially the Federation, they are not, Starfleet doesn't operate in a vacuum. They have presumably civilian oversight. And there were probably, in my headcanon and some of the lore I've talked about, there was a lot of political backlash to the idea that Starfleet would build a battle cruiser. And you see echoes of that in the Defiant later, right? Where it's like, oh, Starfleet doesn't actually have a warship, but it's an escort. So that's fun to think about too, is like, if you have this ship that for whatever reason goes against the grain, what are the political consequences that your crew has to deal with whenever they go to a starbase or deal with an admiral who doesn't believe in what you're doing? I know it's all texture, right? It's all world
this
building.
Could have been a great chapter on its own. That's great. Let me ask you this then. So is this lore that you just talked about, is that somewhere? Like, where would I find that lore for a STO ship like this?
So I've that particular one, we actually did a Space Dock video. We partnered with the guys at Space Dock and did a whole lore video on that. We've done several of those now. I also did a lot of writing for Eaglemoss. We had a 20-issue Star Trek Online Eaglemoss collection where we did some ship miniatures for of ships in Star Trek Online. They each came with a magazine that had lore about those ships. And and then stats and things like that. And then the real life design process. So that's where most of that stuff lives. Otherwise, it's in my head.
Well, no, that's good. The reason I asked that's because myself and Jim like doing reverse engineering type episodes. There's going to be a lot coming up just about TV shows, and we talk about characters. But now, based off that, Aaron, what Thomas just said, if I saw this ship, the Giorgio, again, what class of ship is it? It's
Giorgio class. That's the
class.
First.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the first ship in the class.
So if I was starting off on this, Aaron, do I go to the Walker class based off all the information and start there with that space?
Okay, well, that would be up. I guess that would be up to you. Mm-hmm. How I would approach this is I would say this is a Walker refit.
Okay.
So I would go to the Walker class and then update it to the turn of the 23rd to 24th centuries and say, okay, well, it's a new class, but it's probably based off of a whole bunch of refit and analysis of the Walker class throughout the 23rd century. So it's a new class, but it's basically the Walker updated to, let's say, 2300. So since the Walker class was launched in, let me pull it up here, 2195, you're going to add 11 points to the systems of that base space frame. That's how I would do it. So you're basically adding 2 points to each one of those systems and then 1 point to one of them. I'd likely add just the 1 point to comms on it. I'd say it is a scale 3 because it's a saucer without a secondary hull, and there looks to be large chunks of area of the ship that aren't for crew and are weapon storage, and that generally does not do well to structural integrity if the ship is hit. So, your magazine stores and large batteries. I would say that it likely doesn't have rugged design as a talent because the things that I see on it are lots of impulse crystal type things that you see on the refit on the top. And so I would say it probably has an improved impulse drive. Those are the 4 little circle things that are on each side. And likely an expanded shuttle bay, because that shuttle bay is pretty large for that ship. And if I was, that would be where I would leave the base space frame. And if I was making like a specific ship out of it, I would likely want to try to give it improved warp drive because of the Excelsior bits that are on it. Because I see Excelsior fins that would normally be on the saucer, the Excelsior class. And the actual warp nacelles have a little bit of Excelsior in the grilling.
This, Jim, is a friggin' masterclass on space race.
I mean, like Thomas said, I see Excelsior in this quite a bit. Yeah, it's great, and I also see refit bits. So like, yeah, the clearly the dual photon torpedo launchers that are down there, the 4 tubes. It was, yeah, and then the Miranda style roll bar that it's mounted on. But yeah, scale 3. Do what I said with the systems. Yeah, it's a new class, or you could just say, yeah, this is a really heavily modified Walker, but new class, and then go with those ideas that I gave out, like improved impulse drive, expanded shuttle bay.
Yeah.
Are there mega phasers in? I don't know if STA has that, or we would just call those phaser cannons, or
they're phaser cannons. Okay. So what this looks like, it actually has phaser cannons and phaser banks.
Yep.
So I would just put both of those on there and photon torpedoes.
Yeah,
love it.
Super cool. I love it. This design is just so exciting because this is exactly what I get when I'm reading Aaron's descriptions. Like I read his descriptions, I look at the art, I'll find art online or whatever. And it's like, I've got so many ideas for this particular ship right now. It's the first of the class. You go out, you're exploring new worlds, you're doing new things. You got all this new capabilities, all these new things. I just love it. And
Michael, can you go over to the underside shot again really quick, and Jim, keep going?
Oh yeah, no problem. I was going to ask first a clarifying question. Aaron, did you write all the spaceships, all the space frames for the core book?
Yes.
Okay. So I don't remember this conversation when we were developing the core book because I was focusing on other parts of it. And I was also getting involved in editing the adventure book. These are the voyages. So I may have missed this conversation. But so I know that previous versions of the RPG from other companies tended to present their ship classes and they presented them along with some of the names that Thomas was talking about, where this is a X-class destroyer, this is an X-class frigate, this is an X-class cruiser, etc. And I flipped through the core book. Like, we consciously didn't include that as descriptors in any of our ships. And I think that's a departure from some of the other RPGs that have come along. And I was just wondering, do you remember why we chose to do that?
I can say that right in the first days of development, when I started writing it, I had those ideas of doing that. But in the end, we felt that destroyers, or like heavy cruiser, something like that, anything that sounded militaristic wouldn't fit in with Starfleet. Like, heavy cruiser is used for Enterprise in the original series and in the movies every now and then. And that's fine because that doesn't really sound martial, but like destroyer or frigate, things like that. I think I might slip in frigate every now and then into some of the ship descriptions, maybe. But my idea of what those ship descriptors mean might be different than what the Navy might think. But I mean, a lot of those descriptors end up changing over time anyway.
Yeah.
Like frigate and destroyer don't really mean the same thing in World War II as they did during the Civil War or the Revolution. So,
right. Yeah. Or even now, right? World War II, a World War II destroyer is very different than a modern U.S. Navy destroyer, and a Napoleonic frigate is very different than a World War II or a modern frigate, right?
Yeah.
And we're even actually seeing that right now. It's starting to change again because the Navy is commissioning a new class of frigate, and basically they want it to be a multi-role frigate that can do everything our destroyers can do. So even like what frigates are that's going to change in the next like 10 years. So like that nomenclature is very fluid.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because I noticed I was just flipping through the this is funny, funny in hindsight, not funny now, but I mean funny in hindsight. In the Discovery book, we actually left the descriptors in there. Like we call the Cardenas class a fast cruiser. We call the McGee class a science vessel. We call the Shepard class a light cruiser. So we got it into the Discovery book unintentionally. I forgot to delete it. I think if a player wants to approach either taking the Walker and refitting it to this, or if they want to build a new ship frame, but they're of the, I don't want to say old school, but they're of the school that does make use of those descriptors like destroyer escort, fast cruiser, whatever. How could they kind of like implement that into the toolkit that we have? Would it be just a matter of picking a mission profile, or like what do you think? Is there another way that they could kind of approach that?
So how I would approach it is a smaller ship historically might be like a frigate or a destroyer, and those might be scale 3. You just say, hey, it's a scale 3. A cruiser is generally going to be somewhere between scale 4 and 6, and not be fairly martial, let's say. So you're not going to have like rapid fire torpedo system standard on it, or heavy, advanced shields, things like that. But then you might have a battle cruiser, let's say, or a destroyer escort, which might be a little more martial. So you have your rapid fire torpedoes, advanced shields, improved hull integrity armor. And then you have your dreadnought, like out of the Franz Joseph, which should be kind of beefy, but beefy for Starfleet is a little different than beefy for like the Klingons, let's say. But it still might have some more martial things, and it might be scale 5 or 6.
So the Giorgio specifically, remember that saucer is the size of the Excelsior saucer. It's actually a little bit bigger, I think. So, in terms of internal mass, this is still a bigger ship than like the Reliance or the Constitution. When you look at everything else going on there, for whatever that's worth. And then it was definitely the lore is intended as a battle cruiser, in the sense of, I think, World War I, prior to World War I. Battle cruisers are created as this class of ship that they're essentially designed to destroy anything they can outrun. And so they're heavily armed and fast, but don't have much armor. And that's definitely what the Giorgio is, right? So it would, if you're into the kind of Washington Naval Treaty definitions of these ship types, then the Giorgio would very cleanly fit into that battle cruiser description.
Wow! Now I get to make my mid-level surface observation is that the Giorgio's deflector grid is very similar to the NX-01 Enterprise grid. So I get to make my little observation.
Yeah.
On that.
Thomas, one question I have about your renders. How many? I count 32 total escape pods. Mm-hmm. Is that how many you put on there?
I mean, I don't remember. I was sort of, some of that honestly is you're just like, it's like jazz, you're just like, I need these things here. And then you're looking at the motion picture refit and you notice like, oh, they're not symmetrical. And so I need to make sure that they're little offsets. And then you end up with what you end up with. But I mean, it's interesting because you see those on the saucer of the, they're definitely, they're on the saucer of the refit. And I think they're on the Excelsior as well, but you don't see those little squares anywhere else on like you don't see them in the hull or of either the refit or the Excelsior. So
yeah, in the refit they're and Excelsior they're behind panels, but if you look at some of the semi-official beta canon stuff, they're there, or at least there should be space for them.
Right.
With what we know. And then, like ambassador classes and on, when it became TNG, you can actually legitimately count escape pods and go, okay, I know I can fit like 4 people in here. So this is the crew size.
I was going to ask you that. So you count the number of escape pods to give an estimation on crew size?
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah, whenever I see, and it doesn't hold true all the time.
Right.
But when I see like details like this and I see escape pods, I'll start going, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then I can go, oh, well, this has 32 escape pods. So it should have a crew of about 128.
I hope people are taking notes on this because no, really,
that's me. Your mileage may vary, right?
Right. I mean,
go ahead, Thomas.
Well, I think my intention, for what it's worth, is much more in the ballpark of the Excelsior at 400, 500, 600, whatever the Excelsior had. Maybe a little less than the Excelsior because it doesn't have a secondary hull.
Some escape pods hold up to 10 to 20 people, though, right?
I guess it depends. I mean, these are pretty small, and so that's why I don't know if those essentially they showed up because they are a, I wanted this to feel like a motion picture era ship, right? And so this is definitely the artist side of me, like, well, this is a detail that the motion picture era ship has. Not really sure what it is. I guess it's an escape pod, but I just replicated that and put it on here in the same way that they did on the motion picture era ship. And so, but I didn't want to also, if they were escape pods, I didn't want to add a bunch of extra ones because it's very important to get the visual style. It's very important to like, you're not just replicating like the thing, but you're also replicating the density of it, right? And the spacing of it and the placement of it. All of that goes to making it feel right. So yeah, there probably should be more escape pods for the crew that I had in mind. That's certainly true.
But what a great design! What a great design choice to make, though, right? So maybe you're creating a new space frame. Maybe you're creating a new space frame for an alien species. You might want to think about, okay, how big is the ship? How many escape pods does it have? What's that species' philosophy behind escape pods, right?
Right.
Is it like is it like the Titanic where they've got like a handful of lifeboats, not enough for everybody on the ship, but we got enough that are required by the government, right? We have plenty of boats if you go by that score, but if we sink, well then half the population of the ship is screwed, But maybe like Klingons, do they even have escape pods? Who knows? I think canonically we know they do. But like maybe there's a species that is like, no, if you're on the ship, you're on that ship until it's destroyed or victorious, and there are no escape pods. You're in it for in it to win it, right?
Go home with your shield around it.
I would think Starfleet would probably have enough escape pods on their ship to cover everybody on the crew and then some.
Yeah.
Right. But of course, with the assumption also they're probably going to have shuttlecraft as well.
That's the perfect segue for the sake of time and to get into another ship, because I want to do this exercise one more time. This ship blew me away. So, Thomas, give it to us. What the heck is
What? That is amazing. What is that?
This is the Allied fleet ship Kittimer. So this is in Star Trek Online in the year 2410. The Klingon Empire, the United Federation of Planets, and the Romulan Republic have gone through several pan-galactic crises together, and only survived by working together and sort of realized that, if we want to keep facing down these existential threats like the Iconians, the Herc, several other, any new content we make for Star Trek Online, that we're going to have to pool our resources, not just in our own separate fleets, but sort of understand our differences, appreciate them, and collaborate on new technology. And so they formalized this in the Kittimer Alliance, named after the planet Kittimer, of course, and that's the symbol of the Kittimer Alliance on the ship there. And the first starship of this new Allied Fleet Service is the AFS Kittimer, combined ship number 1, CSN-01, and this is it. So this is this is also about a battle cruiser, about 700 meters long, I think a little over that, and
I got some things to say, but we're going to dig into this. I'm going to get my remedial start on it first. First of all, it looks like you gave a little love to cleave ships on this. A little love to cleave. I know it's a little tilted, but it seems like that has the cleaving power if it had to. But the second thing I was thinking as I'm looking at this ship, I'm like, oh my goodness, you could totally take the Klingon core rulebook and the standard core rulebook and have a combined fleet. I mean, this could be the ultimate officer exchange vessel. I was just like, the stories coming off just looking at this are blowing my mind.
Yeah, and one of the things in the lore, so we did make an Eagle Moss model of this ship.
Oh, wow.
And so when I was writing the lore for it, I mentioned about how one of the challenges they had when designing it is they had to figure out, okay, where are we going to put the Targ pens, and then we have to make all these secret doors for our Romulan officers. Like they had to think about how these very diverse crews are going to live and work together on the same ship, and had to make all sorts of concessions for that.
Yeah. I love it because I see the Negvar in here. I see echoes of the Negvar, and of course the Federation ships. I just love that. I don't think I've seen this design before. It's amazing though, and you're right, Michael. It's sparking off all kinds of great ideas. And it just makes me think that we need to have a talk, because I think a STO supplement would be amazing with all this, with the 12 years of lore from the game. Yeah, we could just go even further into the weeds on starship design and more space frames and all that stuff. So I'll have to think about that.
I'm very, if I can say, I mean, I'm very incredibly proud of this one. And one of the things I'm really proud of too is actually how it was a very divisive design when we launched it, which actually, if you're an artist, that means you did something right? If people have an emotion reaction, either positive or negative, Absolutely. Like the fact that means they care, right? And you're evoking something in them. So a lot of people have been really, really love this ship, and a lot of people really hate it. And to me, that tells me we did our job well. And all credit goes to Hector Ortiz, who is Star Trek Online's concept artist. He's banger after banger, as the kids say. He just does amazing work. And a lot of internally, there wasn't there were a lot of people who were like, I don't know if we can do this, and I was like, I know Hector can do it.
And it's like the Enterprise met a bird of prey behind a moon and had a secret love style. Yep. It's great.
And I have a question about a piece of this, Thomas. Can you go one of the other pictures, Michael? There we go. There are these round things with orange. Those things. What are those?
So those are so the weapons. So this doesn't use phaser disruptor weapons. This uses a type of weapons, energy weaponry called anti-proton weapons, which I think show up in Voyager maybe. But they are, they're a type of weapon in Star Trek Online. Okay. And we just decided we wanted to. And it's considered a very advanced type of energy weapon.
Yeah.
We have those in this book.
Oh,
yeah,
great.
We actually, they're on page 78. Anti-proton. It's listed in the Utopia Planitia book. Very cool.
So this is going to have a cloaking device, right?
Yeah. I believe it has a cloaking device.
It also has a flag bridge.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, this is the first ship in what's meant to be a fleet of the Allied Fleet Service, right? So, although since it's the first ship, it's done a lot on its own as well. It's considered a battle cruiser because it's a it's so heavily influenced by Klingon ships, and pretty much most Klingon ships are battle cruisers because that's just what a Klingon ship is, like intrinsically. But this is going to be more of a, like you said, like a flagship, or it's the lead ship of the Khitomer Alliance, and so it'll have a flag.
Romulans involved too.
Yeah, the Romulans. So in Star Trek Online, that's a whole other big chunk of lore that we've done about the Romulan Empire kind of fractures once the Romulan supernova happens. And then in Star Trek Online, you play a Romulan, but you're playing a member of the Romulan Republic, which is essentially good guy Romulans, a representative government from survivors of the Romulan Empire, led by Titan, who Titan is, if you remember the Next Generation episode Unification, there's a Romulan teenager that goes up to Spock and shows him a little Vulcan artifact. Yeah. That kid is the Tan, and so we say that he grows up to lead, the next generation of the Romulan people into a better place, right under the mentorship of Spock.
So then I have to ask: Is this cloaking device Romulan or Klingon?
This Klingon is probably Klingon. This ship is primarily. We actually have 3 Khitomer Alliance ships in the game now, and so this is a Fed Klingon hybrid ship, and then we have a Klingon Romulan hybrid ship, and then we have a Romulan Fed hybrid ship.
Do either of those run off quantum singularity drives?
I don't remember. So in Star Trek Online, you actually have. That's a game power that you could have a singularity drive, but I don't remember if we ended up doing that for the other Romulan, the Romulan hybrid ships or not. We might not have, simply for game mechanic reasons, like under the hood reasons. But in lore, sure, like we could.
So now I have to ask Aaron, where would you even start reverse engineering this one?
No, this isn't really that hard with our system. With our system, it really isn't. This is scale 6.
Okay.
It's going to have Federation Starship and Klingon Starship traits. It's going to be basically the 2400, the year 2400 amount of system points. So that means since it's scale 6, it's going to have 62 systems. Cloaking device as one talent. Command ship as a second talent. Most likely, I would say rugged as a trait, as a talent. I mean, and there isn't a good shot of its rear, so I can't really tell you what its impulse drive system.
That's the rear. So it's kind of obscured. There's a giant, like the Bird of Prey, it has a giant main impulse engine in the center, and then it has 2 kind of vector thrust impulse drives flanking.
I might not give it a talent that's related to impulse or RCS, but I might say secondary reactors and then leave the rest for the other 2 for the players and the mission profile. Anti-proton weapons, probably photon torpedoes, because both the Federation and Klingons use that. But it's 2400, and this is supposed to be a flagship, so why not go quantum instead? That makes a little more sense to me. +1 command, maybe even +2 command, because it has a flying flag bridge. I mean, +2 command, and then probably a +1 security, because that's pretty. If it's a battle cruiser, it's a battle cruiser. It's a warship, so give it +1 security.
Jim looks giddy.
There you go, folks.
Go, Jim. You look so giddy.
Oh man, I'm giddy about just listening to this and being so far down in the weeds that we're totally geeking out about starships and starship design and stuff, which I just love. I love hearing it. Like I'm not always good at coming up with it myself, but like I love hearing the stories. But as I've been listening to you all go on about this ship, what I've been thinking about is I would love to run a campaign, like an Admiralty level campaign, of everybody who is involved in the design of this thing, like all the politicking, all the Klingon generals and all the Federation admirals all getting together into a room, arguing back and forth about what this ship was going to look like, what systems were going to be on it. You got the Klingons slamming on the table, walking out of Utopia Planitia or whatever, not getting what they want, and the Federation not getting what they want, and probably a Vulcan admiral trying to mediate and having a real hard time with it. But that story of like, how did this thing come to be if it's not already in the STO lore, right? Like taking a step back and saying, okay, well, here's the end result, the ship, and it's off doing its missions, and that's awesome. But like, how did we get there, right? How did all that politicking happen? Who was involved in that? And what could the player characters do to influence this end result, right? Maybe the mission of the campaign is you have to work together with the Klingons to come up with this new ship design to celebrate the alliance and to cement that alliance, etc. Go.
Well, this ship alone would be more action-packed than DS9. When you think about the different ambassadors and people who would be coming on board, Klingons have species that Federation hasn't met. Romulans have species that Klingons haven't met. Like, this would be the hub of activity. And if it was built at Utopia Planitia, the show would be called Star Trek Utopia Planitia, just the buildup you're talking about.
Oh, yeah. And this has a crew of at least 1,000 on it, just counting the escape pods. So you're going to have tons of different species on board. There's lots of role-playing opportunity there, just Thomas, with different ideas.
And Thomas, was there any idea that maybe over here the gallery or promenade of sorts, like a shopping mall inside, just for delegations and ambassadorial events?
So, I mean, when we're kind of thinking about how the ship would be used, I would definitely be able to hold functions like that. But I also see it less as this is more of the Iron Fist than the Velvet Glove. Like, this is, if this thing shows up, you better pay attention because it's a bruiser, right? It's got anti-proton weaponry. Like, I didn't want to lean so hard in diplomacy we forget about the fact that it's also a Klingon ship too, and they don't mess around, right?
Can I ask you, like most big battleships like this, would it probably be accompanied by some escorts nearby at all times?
So, yeah, I mean, and that's something, when I was thinking about the lore of the ship, that probably what happened is when they stood up the Allied Fleet Service initially, there weren't any bespoke ships for it. So you probably had the Federation, we're going to donate a squadron, and the Romulans are going to donate a squadron, and the Klingons are going to donate a squadron, and they get repainted into this, this Khitomer livery, and now they're Khitomer ships, and everybody on board, they're Khitomer officers, and maybe they even start mixing crews, who knows? And then so you could have, depending on the mission, you could have the Khitomer operate with a mixed squadron like that. This is essentially, I mean, the thought exercise here that I was trying to go through is like, what if NATO had its own Navy, right? Like, if NATO didn't just operate with its member nations' equipment, but actually, no, this is a NATO aircraft carrier. Like, what's that like, right? And so, and that's just sort of, that sounds like a nightmare, frankly, but but also through the rose-colored glasses of Star Trek, right? And it's very important to me, and one of the reasons that I was the one who suggested this, not to take the credit for the idea, but it was my idea. And the reason I wanted to do that is because the storyline in Star Trek Online starts with the Federation and Klingon at war. And so I wanted, and this ship was for our 10th anniversary. So for our 10th anniversary, I wanted to make something really unique and special that also encapsulated that idea of a hopeful future of Star Trek. So if you've been with STO through the whole 10 years at the time, you started off blowing up Klingons in your little Miranda, and then you progress through the story and you see how the plot evolves and how the Klingons and the Federation start working together, and then the Iconians show up, and then the Herc show up, and then the Syncathian, all these things happen, and these different powers who used to be enemies now grow close together to solve all these problems. And so, yes, I think the Khitomer must have been a very difficult baby to sire, but at the same time, I want it to be a success, right? At the end of the day, I want it to show that there is strength in diversity, and that when we work together, we can create incredible things. And so that's kind of the moral of the whole, of the idea of the Khitomer and what it sort of represents.
This ship
I'm curious.
Then, I love that you said that.
Yeah, I love it. So I'm curious then, what's the command structure like on the Khitomer? Is it a joint command, or is there a Federation commander or a Klingon commander, or what did that look like? So
the captain of the Khitomer is a Klingon. His name is Captain Kagrin, And he is actually a character who shows up during the Iconian War story arc. So the Iconians, they return from the past, and they've got, literally hundreds of thousands of super advanced starships, and they're going to kill everybody. And then the only way that you can take them out is time travel. Essentially, that's the only, for whatever reason, Iconians can't travel through time. So you team up with the Krenim, and you get an Anarax type starship like from the Year of Hell. You get one of those things and you try to erase Iconians from existence, and it doesn't work. So then you trying to find another way, and you go back in time, and Kagran is there with you. He's been sort of doing this operation. He's just a non-player character. And eventually he kind of comes to understand what actually happened and helps to resolve the situation, not through violence, but he understands why, where the anger the Iconians are feeling comes from, and helps to resolve it. And so it's a little weird that the Klingon did that, but it's cool. I think it's actually kind of cool. So when we were picking the commander for the Khitomer, we wanted somebody who was an Estia before. I didn't want it to be a human, or actually I didn't want it to be a Starfleet person. And I felt like because Kagran was the one, was instrumental in the resolving the Iconian War peacefully, that he was a very natural fit where everybody would respect him, right? He was at the center point of this crisis and found a way out without actual, more bloodshed. So Federation would respect him, the Romulans would respect him, and obviously the Klingons would.
Well, I found something cool too, talking about the crew. I'll share it real quick. Look at that. I just typed in to look for the uniforms. I'm like, well, what kind of uniforms would these people wear?
Yeah, so we have uniforms for the Khitomer Alliance now.
So that's
as well.
I have to ask, who's the character on the right?
Oh, I don't know. That's some
the leader.
These are all player characters.
The leader.
Yeah, these are all player characters,
That's
so they're all going to look a little weird. But yeah, we do have the uniforms are kind of supposed to be a hybrid Klingon Starfleet look.
Mm-hmm.
How inspiring. I mean, I just got to say, again, because of time, I can't get into STO, unfortunately. I'm so into STA and other things. But the creativity, the marriage, again, of STO and STA, and now understanding the mechanics of how to build a starship, like where to start, and just all that lore, it's just, to me, inspiring me to get out there and play more games, which I never have time to play, right? But this was one of the best designs, Thomas, that I saw. It definitely caught my attention, so I'm so glad you shared that one with us.
Thanks. It's been a lot of fun to talk about it, for sure.
Very cool. Boy, I mean, I know we could go on and on and on, but again, the goal of today's continuing conversations was to highlight chapter 4 of the Utopia Planitia book. I wanted people to understand the psychology behind the design. I mean, we had Aaron, we have Thomas, some of the best ship designers that we have, and in inspiring me now to take another look at that chapter and appreciate, that these frameworks are really helping us to build the narrative. As you all were speaking, it's not just the ship, it's the story, and ships are characters. And Utopia Planitia, I think, hit the mark on that. Jim, you want to give us some words about this experience?
This particular experience about this episode, this has just been great, just to listen to two subject matter experts just totally geek out all over this stuff. I could go another 6 hours just listening to all this, and throwing in little questions to prompt conversation and stuff. And we could dig into the Franz Joseph technical manual and all the other technical manuals, but I don't think we need to. I think we've covered I think we've hit it on the head pretty good here. I don't think we need to go in the weeds any further. But no, this has been great, and I hope players understand that, like, you can take the toolkit that's in Utopia Planitia and literally build anything, like anything Star Trek-ish, or even from another property, and port it into Star Trek, by making some tweaks and using the toolkit. Like if you see some cool ship that's in a different franchise or in a one-off movie or something, like I'm thinking The Last Starfighter. I'm thinking Battle Beyond the Stars, that crazy ship with the
NSCA Protector.
Enemy Mine.
Yeah, Galaxy Quest, Enemy Mine. And there's no shortage of science fiction movies and television shows out there. Heck, what I've been thinking about, because I was actually looking at the technical manual the other day. I would love to do a Space 1999 Eagle and see what that looks like. I mean, it'd obviously be very old school and maybe probably scale 2. because they're relatively small, not much bigger than a runabout. But just thinking about it, it's like, oh, I could build an Eagle type ship and like port it in, and like it'd be a new ship for some new species in Star Trek, and it would fit, right? I could just change the aesthetic of the ship design so that it's not completely ripping it off of the TV show. But I mean, there's just so many possibilities here. And so if you take Utopia Planitia and literally any of our other supplements, especially like the Gamma Quadrant and the Delta Quadrant, where you've got all those other new alien species, and even Shackleton, I guess, you could take the Calmurans and the Vinchari and create some amazing new ships with all the stuff that's in the book. So I can't wait to see once this finally gets out into regular distribution, right? The books actually get out there and more people use it. I just can't wait to see what kind of stuff people come up with. Like I've already seen some streamers and gamers out there starting to create new stuff and putting it up on continuing mission. And I just can't wait to see what else comes along, because, Star Trek Online is continuing to fire off new ships. They've got 600 ships in the library. A lot of that stuff hasn't gotten into game format yet. So, if you're a blogger for a continuing mission, like you got a full-time, well, not a full-time, but you got job security ahead of you, because there's so many ship classes. Right. I haven't even touched the comic books and the novels and the video games that have come out over the last 56 years. There's no shortage of space frames that you could build for just the Federation, right? Not to mention all the different alien species. So I just hope people have fun with it.
Yeah, let's rotate. In fact, with our gratitude and appreciation, I actually want Thomas to make sure that you, I want you to plug where, besides playing STO, which people really should do if they have the opportunity to do, because, the little bit I played, it was addictive, and I was like, I had to, balance my time. But if people want to, if they see a ship in STO, repeat one more time, where can they go to find a little bit lore on it so they can go ahead and reverse engineer it into a game for STA? Where would you send them?
So I would probably have them look at the Star Trek Online wiki. They're usually pretty good about collating if there is any lore that shows up in a devlog or an Eagle Moss magazine or whatever. Usually that gets ported over to the STO wiki. So if you just Google STO wiki or Star Trek Online wiki, you'll get there. And that's a great it's a great resource for the developers too to go on that. So I think that's a great place to start to look for more about Star Trek Online starships.
Okay, fantastic. I want people to make sure to know that, because we know we go into the weeds all the time when I'm writing a game. I just end up over here. So I like having more resources. Let's do thank yous all the way around. Thomas, before we sign off, we'll go Thomas, Aaron, myself, and then Jim to close it out. Give our thank yous to whoever you want. Shout out.
I want to thank you guys for just letting me be a part of this project. It was a ton of fun, and we've been working on I've been working on STO for over a decade now, and it's great, right? I've always had the ambition of seeing the work we've been doing in STO seep outside of the game and live in kind of the greater fandom consciousness. And I really appreciate your work in enabling that with the Utopia Planitia book. So thank you so much.
Aaron.
Thanks to Modifius to let me actually be a part of this, and Jim specifically. And then thank you to the fans who have supported the game, supported what we've been doing, and have given us feedback and the passion to keep us going, to make us feel like, hey, we are actually doing something here that's making people happy and letting people enjoy Star Trek a little more.
Good. Now, I know I always do the brick and mortar. So the other day I was driving through Concord, California. I pulled off over at Flying Colors Comic Books in Concord, because I needed to get I need a hard copy. I do know mostly digital comic books now, but I needed my 400th issue of Star Trek comic, and I needed Picard issue #1. So I pulled off, and those guys were so nice. And, I just dropped, I was like, yeah, I kind of, do some freelance writing for Star Trek Adventures. And we had a great conversation. And they pointed me to where I'm on the hunt for board cubes at game shops. So I pointed me to the local game shops. There were none. But I really appreciate brick and mortars out there who carry the games, Star Trek Adventures, and are so hospitable to people and trying to, run games to get more people into it. It's one of the best, most refreshing forms of recreation out there. Again, each game usually ends with a happy ending, which is so different than media nowadays. So we love giving our praise to brick and mortar who give us this beautiful escapism. All right, Jim, close it off for us.
Yeah, I want to thank, I think I've said it before, but I'll say it again because it can't be said often enough. I want to thank everybody in Star Trek from the very beginning all the way up to now, who've been involved in designing starships, either in on paper, in physical models, and then moving on into CGI. I think they really created the ships to be another character on the show that is every bit as iconic and as important as the actors on the show, right? So you've got Kirk and you got the Enterprise. You can't have Star Trek without both of them. Both of them are Star Trek, right? It's every ship is so important to the franchise. So everybody who's ever, there's so many names, I couldn't possibly name them all, but thanks to all of them. I certainly want to echo the thanks to Thomas. I'm so glad we finally were able to connect and get you involved in the Discovery book, and then Utopia Planitia, and then whoever what comes next. There'll be more, I'm sure. As long as you're happy playing with us, we'd love to keep playing with you. And if there's anything we can do to support STO in terms of artwork, I don't think you need our artwork as much as we love to have yours. But if there's anything you all need from any of our products, we're happy to share it and cross-pollinate, because we're benefiting from the cross-pollination every bit as much as you are, possibly even more, because obviously by the virtue of the fact that you're a video game, you have a much bigger fan base and a much bigger gamer base. And it's just, just in the last 2 weeks since we started this thing pre-order, I've seen just a huge amount of interest in the game from circles that we hadn't really touched before. And awesome. A lot of it's exposure, right? It's just getting the word out there that this thing exists. And I'm just so excited to see what comes next. But in the short term, I'm just excited for this one. But yeah, thanks to Thomas, especially to Aaron. I know you sent me that pitch a couple of years ago, and we're finally here. So I hope we did you good. I hope I didn't disappoint you too much. I know we had to trim a lot and change things around, and but I think it worked, and we have plenty of work to do. So
it happens. That's the business, right?
Yeah. But finally, I'll also echo what you've already said, and I'll say thank you to the fans, because if we didn't have such a passionate fan base for Star Trek Adventures, and starships in general, there's no way we could have done this book. No way at all. We wouldn't have been doing this game for 6.5 years without the fan base. So thank you for being passionate. Thank you for being so supportive of each other. Like I see it all the time on social media and Discord and all the other forums, that the fans really support each other with questions and inspiration and fan-made material, etc. And thank you to Michael for creating Continuing Mission right at the very beginning of the game's life, really, because
Tony and Colin and a whole bunch of
everybody at Continuing Mission, because I don't think there is another STA fan site anywhere close to Continuing Mission, and it just maybe because I don't know of it, but I don't think I've ever seen one come up other than like the files that are on the Facebook group or whatever. But I think you set the gold standard very early on for what a fan site could be and do, and that's just a huge benefit. So thank you for that too. Not to sound self-serving, but obviously, thank you. And I know we don't.
We're fans, and like I said, I represent the fans and the people who just love it, and so we appreciate the art, and I love celebrating everybody involved. Like I said, for Star Trek, fans make the genre, so they deserve their voice, and we try to give that to them on Continuing Mission. All right. Well, I'm definitely going out with this money shot here. For those of you who listen to this on podcast and didn't watch, you have got to go back and watch this on YouTube, because these ship designs were awesome. But we're out of here. IDIC. Love y'all.
Live long and prosper. Be safe. Be well. We'll talk to y'all next time.